Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me so far, and hope you're excited for part 2. Enjoy!
This next solution is a fun one because it's a creative way to use the tools that we already have access to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the material icons library for compose and some compose animation primitives to try and make these material icons a little bit more interactive. So I set up a little scaffolding here, which is just a button that's rendering one of the material icons, this delete icon, and it looks like a trash can. And right now I can click it. It doesn't do really anything. Now the first approach that I might take is to actually just animate that image that's rendering the icon. Let's go ahead and do that. So if I want to animate something like the rotation of that trash can, let's go ahead and set up all the things we need for that. I'm just going to do it with animatable. So I'm going to set up a scope, and I'm going to say that the rotation equals remember animatable 0. So this gives us a little bit of control on when we actually start the animation. And then when I, in this clickable modifier, I can just do something like scope.launch, which launches the coroutine, and then I can actually animate that value. So rotation.animate2, I'm going to say it's going to get back to 0f, and then I'll just set up some keyframes to make it a little more interesting. I'm going to set the duration to about a second, and then let's add some keyframes. So we're going to do -10f at 200, 10f at 400, -5f at 600, 5f, 5f at 800. So now that changes the rotation, and now the only thing left to do is to actually apply that rotation value to the icon. So I'm just going to open up the graphics layer. I'm going to set the rotation z, because that's the axis we want to rotate around, equals rotation.value. And then interactive mode is still running. If we click it, you can see this nice little shake animation. That's already pretty good, but I want to build something a little bit more fun. And I want to try and animate the lid separately from the body part, the trash can, to create some more interesting animations. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually just going to redraw the icon myself so that I have full control over the components that make up the icon. Now, you might think that is probably going to be a lot of work. Like, these shapes aren't necessarily that easy to reason about. I mean, sure, this is a rectangle, but this lid isn't like a very standard shape. So how would I even go about redrawing that? Well, what if I told you you don't even need to know how to redraw it because all that information is already given to you? If we look at the material icon definitions, we can actually see that the path drawing information is all right here. So we can recreate this ourselves and just copy the path data and use that to draw the icon. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we have the same button, no animations right now, but let's replace this icon with our own painter. Cool. So instead of just using the icon, which is just this image vector, we can also pass in a painter to this image, and we're just going to create one by hand. So this remember vector painter function allows us to create a vector painter, which essentially just allows us to draw our own vector. And what we can do is we can give it a path. Once we're here, we can give it a path, and we need to give it some path data. So let's just kind of create the path data. Path data equals path data, and I am going to copy all of this stuff in here. Okay, So that's all of the path data. And so now if I supply the path data here and change this to painter, I'm going to change this to painter. Okay, the other thing I need is I need to give it a fill. So I'm going to give it a fill, solid color, oops, solid color, white, color.white. And look at that, it showed up. So now instead of just using the material icon image vector, we are just drawing that same path using this path data helper function to create the path data and then pass that to the path that we're creating in our vector painter. That was pretty straightforward and easy to do, thankfully, because we already have all that path data. And now that we have it, we can play around with it. So one thing you could do is say, like, how can we separate the components? Well, if I just comment this part out, we can see that this part obviously draws the can part of the trash can, and we can see that this part probably draws the lid. Why don't we just go ahead and separate those out? So I'm going to say lid equals path data. I'm going to also change can to path data. And then I'm going to take the body and move it here. And then I'm going to take the rest of that and move it all the way here. So that's the lid and the can. And then all I need to do, get rid of this, and then change this into two paths. So I'm going to change one to the lid, one to the can. And look at that, everything's back in working order. And I can comment one out, and you can see that it's still drawing the individual components now. So that is pretty great. And so now, if I wanted to add animations, well, I can do that. I'll start by wrapping these paths in groups. And I'll show you why I'm doing that in a second. So I'm going to create groups. I'm going to move one here. Just create another group here. So now I have a group for the lid and the can. And the reason I want groups is because they give me access to a couple things that I might want to animate, like rotation, scale, translation. So this is great. So let's say that we want to add an animation, and I want to animate the translation of the lid, and I want to animate the translation of the can. So similarly to before, I'm going to create this coroutine scope. Remember coroutine scope, and I'm going to create lid translation Y, and I'm going to say this is a remember animatable 0f. Okay, copy that, change this to can translation Y. Okay, so I have the things that I want to animate. And now what I'll do here is I'll go down and I will set the translation Y to be lid translation Y dot value. And I'll set the translation Y of the can to be can translation Y dot value. So now these things will be driven by the animatable. And so the last thing I need to do is to actually animate those things. And so if I go into the clickable modifier, let's launch one coroutine, lid, animate to 2F. I'm going to say tween translation y.animate to 0f spring, and I'll set up the damping ratio to be a little bit nicer, springy. Spring damping ratio, high bouncy, stiffness, spring dot stiffness. Say low. See what it looks like. Okay. So with that all being set, let's see if that actually does anything. Okay. So it's slightly the wrong way. I want it to go up and then down. So let's make this negative. Click it again. Nice. So now I just isolated animating the lid. I can do something similar by launching another coroutine in parallel and do something like can translation y dot animate to 2f. Say tween. Animate to 0f tween. Sure. Let's keep that the same. And maybe add like a delay of, I don't know, 500. Not bad, right? I added a delay to try and make it seem like as the lid is coming down, it kind of pushes the bottom of the trash can into its animation, and then it kind of resets, which looks pretty good in my opinion. Now there's one last thing I want to show you here, which is that let's say you don't want to use the material icons. You have some icons that you already like. For example, that trash can icon from Lord Icon. So if you look, I've already imported this icon here. It's kind of hard to see because of the theme. Let me just change the color. Right. So I have the icon that I got from Lord Icon, that trash icon, and I want to use that instead of the material icon. Well, that's actually not too hard to do. Because I've already imported this into Android Studio, I can look and see that I have the path data. And they've already actually separated it out into the separate lid and trash can path data, which is great for me. So what I can do, if I go back to the example, instead of using this constructed path data, I am going to say lid parsed equals and use a tool called path parser dot parse path string dot to nodes. So with this all in place, I just have to supply that path data string, which I have right here. So I'm going to copy, paste, that's the lid. And I'm going to say can parsed. I'm going to change. Okay, let's go back. And if I go down to where I'm using that path data, I'm just going to change this to lid parsed and can parsed. Boom. I have that Lord Icon trash can. And if I click it, the animation still works. So that is awesome. So with the material path data and a little bit of creativity, we're able to create some pretty fun animations. I created these samples in just a couple minutes, and I'm pretty stoked about how they turned out. I'll definitely be playing around with this technique in the future.
That's it for part 2. Hope you guys are enjoying the series, and stay tuned for part 3 coming out later this week. Bye!